Good morning, everyone. Welcome all of you joining the public presentation organized by the Occupational Health Center. The topic is about the intro to consent at work. So we are so pleased to have our health educator, Richard McCrae, to doing this session with us. So for the participation, you could just using the chat area to put your questions. Richard is going to answer your question during his presentation. And this session is being recorded. You can see that we are going to share on the social media and our website later on. What if you weren't able to answer all the questions or cover all the questions? So you could still follow up with us later on. If someone doesn't know about Occupational Health Center, we are the community health center funded by the Winnipeg Regional Health Authorities. We are located on 167 Sherbrooke Street, Winnipeg, Manitoba, with the same building with the CERC and the clinic. So that this is the projects kind of, Richard is going to describe with you later on. And we provide the services to the Manitoba workers with health-related work-related health issues and work closely with the job workplace health and safety committees for training. Our service is all free, and please also visit our website for any information and resources. I know Richard have lots of information is going to pass on. Please join me to welcome Richard.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, and welcome everybody here today. This is a little bit of a different format than I'm used to in the webinar style. I'm used to being able to see other people's faces, and I prefer presenting in a manner where you do more of the talking than I do. So bear with me as we get through this today. I really appreciate everybody's presence today, and this is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. And really look forward to sharing some information with you folks this morning. As Tiffany said, you can feel free to use the chat at any time, and I'll do my best to answer your questions as promptly as I can. If at any point you need to give me feedback about, if I'm talking too fast or if I'm going over topics a little bit too quickly, anything you need me to manage a little bit differently about my presentation or teaching style, please let me know. The most important thing for this session is that you folks get everything that you need out of it, not that I have a good time. So with that, we'll jump into the material a little bit here. I want to start off with the land acknowledgement today. We are on Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. This work that we do in preventing sexual harassment and building a culture of consent at work is so intertwined with other issues that deal with power and privilege and oppression, and of course is so tied in this land and in this space to issues of racism and colonialism, issues that create desperation and magnify imbalances in power dynamics, create space for sexual harassment can thrive, where historically people have felt like they can treat people poorly or take advantage of them or get away with things that are absolutely unacceptable. And the more we can do to address these issues within our systems, the more we can do to prevent sexual harassment. It's so intertwined. I want to acknowledge as well off the top that I have benefited from these systems immeasurably, and so do the people in my family who came before me. That will impact the way, excuse me, that I present this material today and the way that these ideas work for me. We always do our best to try to be accountable to that, to make sure that we're being aware of these materials and these ideas, and know that they are tools that come from a lot of research from people with more lived experience than we have. I typically do have a co-facilitator with me who is a fantastic resource as well, but for today I'll be doing this solo, and want to make sure that I am being as sincere and vulnerable with the ideas of my privilege as I possibly can be. So if anybody has feedback later on in the evaluation or to me personally about things I could have handled better or things I may be overlooking, I am more than happy to receive that feedback. It makes me better at my job and makes this work safer. So our project is about consent at work. It's part of a national program that funded projects all across the country to address workplace sexual harassment in the wake of Me Too. We have 3 partner organizations working on this project, ourselves at the Occupational Health Center, who bring a labor and workers' rights and health and safety lens to this work. We have CERC, who are tremendous leaders in the field of education around sexuality and gender and sexual health, and a clinic who brought such valuable information on making sure that this work is responsible and trauma informed. It's been a wonderful collaboration that I've been so privileged to be a part of. Our work differs from other sexual harassment prevention projects, where we're not really focusing on the legal side or the policy side. We're focusing on a community health response. So looking at how we can change our workplace culture and have those social responses and positive habits to try to create a workplace culture where sexual harassment is as unlikely as possible. So we only have an hour here today together, and I'll probably only be talking for about 45 minutes of those. These sessions usually last 4 hours if they're virtual, or a full day if they are in person. And we focus on these main pillars in our presentation. We look, like I said, at workplace culture, challenging harmful norms, being intentional about your workplace and what is already working well and what makes your workplace identity, and using that to help build a culture that addresses sexual harassment. We look at consent at work, where we normalize positive habits and incorporate consent into our day-to-day activities to build up trust and accountability and respect and communication. And then we shift to bystander interventions, where we're holding each other accountable socially and making sure that we have all the tools we can rely on to make sure that our interventions are as safe and as effective as they can possibly be, encouraging people to speak up in moments where they know something inappropriate or unsafe is happening, holding people accountable in a way that maintains the integrity of our workplace culture and allows our relationships to continue if that is what's best for the workplace. Then we look at supporting disclosures, where we break down barriers and show our colleagues that we are people who can be relied on and approached with trust and respect to support if something unfortunate or inappropriate has happened in our workplace. And today as well, we will share some resources of other folks who are doing really tremendous work in this province to address sexual harassment at its root or respond to unfortunate situations. So we start off today by looking at workplace culture. So just to jump back for a second, well, today we're just going to look at the first 2 points here as our introduction. If folks would like to get the full experience and book the full workshop, I'll share information at the end, or you can reach out to us at OHC to book, and I'll share a little bit more about that later on. But yeah, today we'll focus on the first 2 points. So workplace culture is at the core of what we do here. And for me, in the creation of this workshop and the research that we were doing, we tried really hard to look at the kind of work that has been done to prevent workplace sexual harassment over the last 50 years, and where people have had success and where maybe things haven't been working as well as they could be. I think people approach this kind of work a lot with the intention of doing a lot of good and with the belief that they're creating positive change, but we don't always get to see the long-term ramifications of the kind of education that we're doing in the moment, and sometimes we historically haven't been as good about reflecting sincerely on the impacts of the work that we've been doing. So we looked at traditional approaches to harassment, and honestly, it was pretty daunting for the first 6 months to a year before we really started finding the pieces that were effective. And for me, an epiphany happened sitting at the lunch table at OHC, looking around at all my colleagues and asking myself what it was about the culture here that seemed to be so effective, that was so kind and professional and frankly, the least toxic workplace I'd ever been a part of. And to me, so much of it came down to the culture that we created, a culture of professionalism, a culture of safety and accountability and respect. I didn't feel like folks were treating each other the way they were because they were afraid of punishment, or because they were afraid of getting called out. I think that there was just an underlying respect. So I started asking myself, how do we create that? So when we talk about our workplace culture, we're talking about the values and attitudes that we bring to work every day, how it feels to come through that door, how we behave to one another, whether it's at a meeting or grabbing a drink after work or talking in the hallway or at the water cooler. All of those are part of our workplace culture, and it can shift between the lunchroom and the boardroom, and it can shift being in one coworker's office to another. But how can we be intentional about creating the culture that we want day to day? So we like to ask folks, who determines a workplace culture? And the answer that we get to is complex, right? All of these things are going to be playing a role in what it feels like to come to work every day, how safe we feel, how productive we are, how we treat each other, whether or not it's the people at the very top of the organization, whether it's people from the outside, regulatory bodies, our union, the people that we deal with, our customers, frontline workers. All of that is going to have an impact. And so fundamentally, what we like to reflect on, though, is workers. I'm sure everyone at this webinar today, everyone we've talked to in every presentation we've done over the last few years, has had a coworker that's made our lives easier, that's made it easier to get out of bed in the morning and come to work. People who made things run a little bit more smoothly, or made the day a little bit lighter, or who we could share a joke with. If we had that coworker and they moved on to a different role or a different department or a different job, it probably was really hard. It probably had an impact on us, and there was an adjustment period, right? We probably also had a colleague or supervisor or a manager who was the opposite, who made things a little bit tougher, who made us have to work, 15% harder to pick up some slack, or just made things feel a little bit like heavier or less safe. And probably when that person moved on, found a new role, switched departments, or went to a new job, it was probably like an immense weight was lifted off, right? I'm sure we've all had that experience on both sides. And so what we like to think about is that idea that each person has such a vital role to play in the workplace culture experience for all of our colleagues. And so how can we be as intentional as possible about creating a culture that's as safe and accountable for everybody in that workplace? And how can we be intentional about that day to day in our habits? Because ultimately, one workplace can feel safe for one person and unsafe for another. And it only takes one coworker feeling unsafe for us to have an unsafe workplace. So we want to be intentional about creating this space, and we want to be intentional about making it as open and accessible and safe for all of our colleagues, everyone we work with, to make sure that we don't have that unsafe workplace happening, even at a micro level. So when we think about what happens to make a workplace feel unsafe, it's rooted in power, it's rooted in community, it's rooted in belonging and accountability. Power dynamics like hierarchies, marginalization within our groups, income and risk is a huge one. We saw it a few decades ago with the global financial crisis. We're seeing it now with COVID. The more we rely on accommodations or special treatment, the more we rely on a workplace to keep us safe, and the more desperate we are to hold on to our employment, and the more precarious that becomes, the more striking and stark the power dynamics are, and the more likely someone is to be taken advantage of. That's not to say that sexual harassment only happens from people with power to people without it, but we know that it's more likely to occur where there is imbalance in that manner. In terms of the environments where sexual harassment can thrive, we can have a culture that tolerates inappropriate behavior. We can have a culture where folks, bring something to the table, whether or not it's an expertise or a quality in their job, whether or not it's a reputation attached to them, where people maybe tolerate inappropriate behavior because somebody is valuable, essentially, in whatever way that might be. Folks might have a lack of support or not know what their options are, and there can be physical and social isolation tied to all of these other factors as well. If we don't feel like we have somebody we can lean on or talk to, if we don't have faith in our organization to support us when something goes wrong, those are factors that will increase the likelihood and severity of sexual harassment. So when we talk about workplace sexual harassment, we're talking about any act of a sexual nature that's carried out without consent within a workplace. It can happen by a wide variety of perpetrators, locations, and actions. It doesn't always have to look the same, and it's not always the same people doing it. It's rooted in systems of oppression and discrimination, like we said. The more vulnerable folks are, the more likely they are to be taken advantage of. It can be a tool to gain control and power over others, to keep people down and keep people isolated, and keep them from getting that kind of support we spoke of. And it's important for us to note also that no environment is immune. It can happen anywhere. We know that in terms of reputation and stereotypes, we think of the construction industry, we think of restaurants, we think of the entertainment industry as places where this has really thrived, but it can happen in any environment, small teams, big teams, places that are doing everything quote unquote well or right. And it's important for us to note that if sexual harassment has impacted you, it's not your fault, right? The only person whose fault it is the person who's decided to act inappropriately or take advantage of somebody else. So when we talk about the long-term impacts of workers in a culture where sexual harassment thrives, this is where OHC likes to bring our workplace health and safety lens into this. There are massive repercussions in terms of our mental health, our emotional health, our psychological health, and our physical safety, not just in terms of directly being sexually harassed or sexually assaulted at work, but also in terms of the stress and the burnout that goes alongside of being in an environment where that is happening and tolerated, right? So we have more fear, we have more burnout, we have more stress at home. We can't leave these things at the office when we leave. We worry about our job security. It's less likely to be solid in an environment where sexual harassment can thrive. Our relationships are going to suffer, and like I said, our physical and mental health, the reputation of the organization, and the trust, not only with our coworkers, but organizationally, and a distrust that we might carry with us for the rest of our lives. So when we think about a workplace where sexual harassment is likely to happen, and we discuss this with people who attend our workshops, these are the big answers that we tend to get. So we get trust, respect, accountability, communication, and good policy and procedure. And these things are massive. They also, a lot of these words mean different things to different people. I think you could find 1,000 synonyms for respect and sub definitions for that word, and same with accountability. And so I'm going to try to break that down a little bit as we talk about this a little bit more. So the other part, of course, with creating a culture of consent isn't just culture, but also consent. Like we said, the systems that allow sexual harassment to thrive and continue to thrive are rooted in patriarchy and sexism and homophobia, transphobia, ableism, racism, colonization, all of these things. And as good as I would like to think I am at my job, and my partner as well, we're not going to undo all that with a 4-hour training or a 1-hour webinar. And so what we're going to do instead is focus on creating positive habits, looking at being intentional about creating small changes and planting seeds now that can grow into sustainable change for your organization over the long term. And we start off with a simple question, which is, why do we knock? It's a very, very simple act of getting consent. And in that small action of knocking, we're telling our colleague, I respect your privacy, I respect your space, I respect your time, I respect your work. And it might seem like such a simple task, a simple act that takes a second. But in that moment, we're reinforcing so many of these messages around communicating with that person about your intentions, about having respect for, like I said, their time and their space and their work, showing that they can trust us to respect boundaries that exist even implicitly. But then we can break it down a little bit more, because consent gets a bit complicated and exists in shades of gray. So if someone were to knock on their coworker's door and ask if they have a few minutes to chat, is it possible that the coworker says that they're free, even though they don't actually have time to talk? And of course, we've probably all experienced a situation like this before. And there are simple reasons that might have happened. And something that we run into constantly is this idea of it just being polite to say yes. Even when we want to say no, we feel this pressure, whether it's cultural or rooted in our workplace or rooted in our personal lives. We feel this pressure to be accommodating to folks and create space and say yes. And that's not inherently bad. We want to be polite and we want to be kind. But then it can get a little bit more serious and a little bit more nefarious. Maybe this person is saying yes because they fear reprisal. Maybe this person is saying yes because they're worried that because of their cultural or racial or sexual identity that they'll be perceived a certain way if they say no. Maybe that person is afraid that they'll lose job security or that that person will retaliate in some way if they say no, or they're worried that if I say no now, that person's going to say no to me later, right? And so that gets us to the trickier part of consent, because I think a lot of times when we think about consent, we think about it just in terms of relationships, we think about it just in terms of sex. And we think about it as a simple yes or no, and you know, a lot of definitions have it as permission, right? It's one short interaction, yes or no, and that's sort of a permanent lasting answer. But the fact of the matter is that the consent is an ongoing process. It's an experience that you're sharing with somebody else that is rooted in permission, but can be so much more complex. And so at the tip of the iceberg, what we typically see and think of when we consider consent is things like contracts, getting simple permission and yes or no, right? But when we get into the more complicated aspects of consent, we see that it can be so much more than that. It can be something that helps us communicate more directly, that takes the guesswork out of things, that helps us set healthier workplace boundaries for others and for ourselves. It takes surprises out of things and fosters accountability, strengthens our relationships. And all of this is so important in creating that culture of accountability and trust and respect and communication, right? So how can we practice consent at work? It is so simple and so complicated at the same time, but we like to break it down into three main factors. So actually asking somebody, asking in a thoughtful, genuine, and appropriate manner. So when we think about that, you know, and compare it to, you know, the way we typically think about consent with dating and things like that. You know, it's one thing to ask someone you're in a relationship with if they would like to kiss or hold hands, right? Because you have a foundation of trust and experience there where that is a reasonable expectation. But walking up to a stranger or walking up to a coworker and asking if you can hold hands or kiss is not a thoughtful, genuine, or appropriate question out of the blue, right? So we want to be considerate and empathetic and putting ourselves in the other person's shoes when we ask. Then we also want to listen. We want to make sure that person understands that we are actively listening and sincere in our care for their response, and then complying with what they said, and then also respecting that in the moment, but also beyond the interaction. You know, if I were to ask a colleague to borrow a pen and they were to say no, and I say, okay, that's cool. And then later that day, I you know, complain to everybody and you know, don't offer them an opportunity to collaborate on a project and you know, hold that against them, then I'm not actually, you know, using consent in a way that is going to help our workplace culture. And so even with something as simple as knocking and asking someone if they had a few minutes to chat, we can see where these things break down. And as simple as the ad can be, the violation in that moment can feel awful. And so something that I've seen quite often, right, is people messing up at every stage of this. So somebody knocking on your door and just walking in without actually checking in if you're busy or if you have time. So that's missing the ask. On the other hand, somebody might knock on your door and ask if you have time to talk, and you can say no, and their response is, "Well, it'll take a second." So in that moment, they're not actually listening to what your response was or considering it. And then respecting beyond the interaction would be, you saying, "I don't have time today, I'm absolutely swamped," and 5 minutes later, they're back knocking on your door again. Not respecting the fact that you set a boundary in that moment. Another example could be asking to follow a colleague on social media. I had this experience previously where I asked a colleague to follow them on social media, and they said they had a personal policy where they don't follow coworkers on social media, and I've respected that. And you can imagine how disrespectful it would be and how much it would indicate a lack of trust and communication and respect if that person told me they had a policy where they don't follow coworkers, and then a month or two later they got a friend request from me, right? That would be not respecting the response beyond the interaction. So we end up talking a lot in our sessions about people pleasing and saying yes. We talk about these simple things like being asked for a minute of your time, or responding to emails outside of work, or not taking lunch breaks, right? Working through lunch because you've been asked to. And in a bubble, those things don't seem like a very big deal, right? But day in, day out, that going on where you're saying yes to things that you actually want to say no to can have a really negative impact on your mental health. It can lead to burnout. It can lead to a fracturing of relationships. And so when we talk about asking and listening and respecting, we also want to make sure that these are productive moments of consent, not performative. And what we end up with in a lot of situations where people feel like they can't say no is we're having performative consent, where a supervisor or a boss is asking someone to do something and they say yes, absolutely, even though they'd rather be saying no. And the expectation of yes is always there. And I've heard people say that. I've heard people say things like, I asked this person if they had 5 minutes to talk and they said no. What kind of person says no to a supervisor, right? And so that can be demeaning and demoralizing. We do live in a society and we have jobs where sometimes we don't get a decision in everything that we do. Sometimes a director or a manager will tell you you have to come in on Saturday. And for me personally, 10 times out of 10, I would rather have someone tell me I have to come in on a Saturday rather than ask me and have me have to pretend that I want to come in on a Saturday. 10 times out of 10, that's less demeaning to me. And if it's the truth, if I don't have a choice in the matter, I don't want to have this performative interaction where we're pretending like something consensual is happening. That is extremely counterproductive. So when we consider having meaningful consent in our asking, listening, and respecting, we think of essentially two kinds of workplace culture. One that we run into a lot working with a lot of nonprofits is what we're going to see in the pink circles here. And so we're going to have in an effective consent culture, space where people can be direct, right? Where people can be assertive and say, I want to go to lunch with people today. And they can also say, I don't want to go out for a lunch with people today. If that's what they actually feel in the moment, they can say, I'm not comfortable following people on social media that I work with. Or having the assertiveness in that moment to say, I'd like to follow you on social media, right? And there's kindness in on the other side of that, where we want to be thoughtful and we want to be accommodating, and we want to be sensitive to what other people want and need, so that they can be happy and calm and safe at work, right? People having the power and safety and trust in our coworkers to say no, and having on the other side people who respect boundaries and check in and look for them, right? Then we have our wants and needs, and then checking in beyond that. So you might see a workplace where somebody can be assertive, they can be direct, they can talk about what they need, they can talk about what their expectations are, they can hold each other accountable in those moments to maybe a high standard of work. Folks can say no, they can set boundaries, they can be courageous in those moments, and then expressing what they want and need, what their expectations are. That's good. That's a positive thing. And you can have a workplace where people are kind and sensitive and empathetic to one another. That's also very powerful and very good. People who respect other people's boundaries and check in a lot. And they're empathetic in that moment beyond just what the person's saying, but taking it that extra step. But the real magic happens when we have both of these things, right? We have the directness and the kindness and sensitivity. We have people saying no and the respect. We have people who can express their wants and needs, and people who can go that extra step, because some people are going to be more comfortable being assertive, whether it's because of how they were raised or their cultural background or their experiences at other workplaces. So being able to take that extra step and say, maybe you go to someone's office and you say, hey, I need a minute. I need a bit of support from you for the next few minutes. But you look at that person and their phone is ringing and they look like they're going to cry and they're really stressed out. And so you can take that extra step and say, hey, I know you're saying yes, but it doesn't seem like it's authentic in this moment. It seems like you need a minute. So why don't I come back later? And that's what we mean when we talk about checking in sort of beyond the interaction. So this is where it can get a little bit tricky as well. When what messages are we sending? And people have a hard time with this sometimes. So it seems obvious when we respect the boundary set by somebody, we are letting them know that we respect them and that we can be trusted and that we can be accountable, right? And all of those things are so positive. When we don't respect a boundary, we are doing so much damage to all these things we talked about before. I won't go all the way back in the culture side. The accountability and trust and respect and communication, right? We're damaging that. And what we don't think about is the other side of it. When we set a boundary for ourselves, the good that does for trust, the good that does for respect and communication and autonomy and all those other important ingredients for an environment where harassment won't thrive. When somebody sets a boundary with me, when somebody can give me feedback or hold firm on something that's important to them, that is wonderful to me. Not only because I know I can trust that person in that moment to communicate what they actually feel, which is so important, but it is also an endorsement of my character as a colleague and how they see me. If somebody feels like they can give me strong feedback or set a boundary with me, they are telling me in that moment that they trust me to be respectful, to not overreact, to not retaliate, to hear a boundary and understand it. And that is a wonderful endorsement of how they perceive me. And that is a hard thing for some people to get their heads around. And we think of the other side of that. I had a colleague who meant the world to me, still one of my very, very good friends. And I remember a day that we were sitting in the office together and a manager came by with a giant stack of flyers that needed to be, or posters that needed to be put up. And they wanted to put up around the Exchange District for an art night that we were hosting. And they said, hey, can anybody poster this weekend? I can't do it, I'm swamped. And my colleague raised their hand and they said, yeah, I'll do it. I love postering. It's so satisfying. And the second that supervisor was out of the office, they turned to me and said, I hate postering. I had plans this weekend. This is my weekend's down the drain. This sucks. And in that moment, I reconsidered every time I'd gotten consent from this person, right? Every time that I thought I'd gotten permission or gotten a yes, and wondered how many times I thought it had an enthusiastic response to something I'd offered. And then as soon as I left the room, this person turned around and started talking about how it wasn't actually something they wanted. So we think about the trust that's created when we say yes, right? But the fact is, if it's not authentic, if it's performative, if it's not based in reality, you're eroding that trust and you're making it more difficult for people to understand what you really want and count on you. And so when we come back to that idea of less surprises here at the bottom of our iceberg, you're having to guess, right? If somebody's saying yes when they want to say no, and you know that, then every time they're giving you a yes or a no, you have to guess and do that extra analysis, and then extra checking in, which can put a real burden on your relationship with that person. So when we think about what we're doing at work, for folks to consider, how are we already asking for and getting consent? And it can be the littlest things. It can be whether or not you want a donut in the morning or a cup of coffee. It can be about taking a break or asking somebody to get a drink after work, or if they have a few minutes to chat. Think about the other opportunities you have to get consent, whether it's around meetings, professionally with your colleagues, or customers, or clients, or other folks that you work with. Where could we practice this more? And it may seem minor, right, to apply this concept to cookies and coffee and drinks and social media. But, as I talked about with the knocking on the door, or the social media, or the postering, we're not perfect at using consent and all those pieces of the circle that we talked about, being as kind as we can be, and empathetic and direct, and communicating sincerely. All of us, even myself, after years of doing this work professionally and on this topic, I can always do better. And what's happening in those moments is we are practicing these skills around discomfort and rejection and courage and boundaries when the stakes are low, with cookies and coffee and social media. And then as the stakes get higher, if somebody's crossing a boundary that makes us feel legitimately unsafe or uncomfortable, or is really crossing that line, we have the skills, the muscle memory, and the practice to still work with those heavy emotions and that fear and that concern, because we've practiced it with the small stuff. We've also perhaps set a standard with other people, practice to see that person responding positively when we set a boundary, to communicate about what went wrong or well when that's happened in the past, right? And so we've also perhaps identified people that we work with who struggle with setting boundaries or respecting boundaries. And we know a little bit more about who we can count on when the chips are down or things get more problematic. So these may seem like very small acts, but they're important practice and experience for folks to have in terms of building a culture of respect and accountability. Another question I asked about this, but it's okay. So yeah, we can consider this in our daily operations. We can consider this in our day-to-day life, socializing with coworkers, or even in our personal relationships, and it can be so important. And then one thing I want to leave folks with that is the idea of asking yourselves, when you're saying yes, when you want to say no, and is it a matter of I'm taking my desire or want in this moment and pushing it aside to accommodate this other person? And is that rooted in my comfort or convenience over their comfort or convenience? Which I think it can be polite, right? I might want the last donut, but I want to be kind, and so I let somebody else take the last donut. And it's not my favorite thing to do. It's not comfortable or convenient for me, but there we are. Versus, am I prioritizing my well-being for someone else's comfort or convenience, right? And so you think about a situation where maybe somebody else has had 2 donuts and you haven't had breakfast, and that donut would mean a lot for you, right? Where is that threshold? Are you, making that accommodation to let somebody follow you on social media who makes you uncomfortable, and now you feel less safe posting because somebody you're professionally connected with can see what you're posting? Where is that line for you? And I would encourage you to interrogate that a little bit, whether or not your yeses when you want to say no are happening in ways that are sustainable and safe for you. Because ultimately, you don't want to be creating an environment for yourself that isn't sustainable and okay, where you're prioritizing someone else's comfort or convenience over your safety and health. And so, Tiffany, maybe you can just let me know 10:15, right? And then questions. Is that the plan? So we have support for folks. If you need help with sexual harassment support, we have a wonderful team member named Jamie Lucero who uses she, her pronouns with Clinic Community Health. We have her number here and her email. So if you need support being connected with resources or someone to speak to, Jamie is there. You can find more resources on support for workers that we offer at our website, which is consent@work.ca. We are also, like I said, partners with Clinic in this, and they run the 24/7 crisis line for folks who've experienced sexual assault. And one thing they've asked us to be really clear about is even if you don't necessarily think that the experience you've had fits the label of sexual assault, it's still an opportunity for you to talk to people. It doesn't have to fit that particular language for you personally for this to be a resource that you can access. There's also the Workplace Sexual Harassment Hotline from Manitoba. So CLEA, the Community Legal Education Association, is the other project in Manitoba under the same funding as us through Justice Canada. And they have a toll-free number from 9 to 12, Monday to Friday, or they can be emailed at sexualharassment@communitylegal.nb.ca. And you can learn more about their project. And if you are looking for a type of training, yeah, you can absolutely access these in other provinces. And if you would like to follow up with us, follow up with me directly or my partner, Lauren, we can connect you to the other projects happening in other provinces where you could get other resources. We're happy to help you navigate that as well. So if you have any follow-up questions or comments about our training, like I said, you can contact me at the Occupational Health Center. Here we can share it with everyone who's attended the training after the fact. And again, you can book our training at consent@work/workplace training. We are also currently running a series of evening sessions. We are on our third of 4 virtual sessions happening this month. Our sessions happen on Wednesdays from 6 to 7. We are also starting this week a series of in-person trainings at our building at 167 Sherbrooke that you can register for on our website. We are doing 3 trainings that will happen from 5:30 to 8 p.m. And cover all the topics that we talked about at the beginning of this training. We have lots of great resources and materials for folks at consent@work.ca. And if folks are able to complete a short evaluation by following the QR code on this page, that would be very appreciated. And now I'm happy to take any questions folks may have. So I'm going to post my email in the chat in case folks need contact me with any other questions. And Joanne, if you want to email me, I can, with your location, I can help you locate those other resources that might be more pertinent to you. So just to circle back as well. Sorry for the extreme slideshow here for a second. When we talk about our full training in the workplace outcomes, the parts that we didn't touch on today were bystander prevention, supporting, and disclosures, which I think is so important. We also would dig more into workplace culture and your workplace culture, and also reflect a little bit more on the consent at work pieces.
Richard, we just got question coming from Victoria on the chat. Can you see it?
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
We are we don't have like different trainings for those industries. We are certainly, you know, we've reached out intentionally towards different folks in industries in Manitoba where we thought there might be a need. We don't offer specific trainings for those industries, but with anybody we meet with for a workplace, we talk about the specific needs of that organization and the folks involved, and we cater the material and tone of the workshop to the needs of that particular workplace. But this workshop is for everybody. Yeah, I think that the workplace health and safety committees can play a massive role in the culture of consent and preventing sexual harassment at work. I think that there is a perception shift that can happen as well, where you know, if for example, I work with an ergonomist, right? And if you were to come to my office and see that my setup is horrible for my back and neck and wrists, and you were to say, hey, Richard, like, we need to reorganize your office and get you a new chair and do all these things because this isn't safe for you, I would never shake my finger at that guy or accuse him of rocking the boat or take it personally. But when we think about being proactive in addressing sexual harassment as a health and safety issue, unfortunately, there's so much more stigma attached to that, and historically, we've had so much more trouble addressing that as through that lens. And so, you know, policies can be better, and you know, folks on health and safety committees can be those leaders to help foster change within a workplace culture. And all it takes is one person being intentional, right? One person being more intentional about their consent, using bystander interventions, encouraging the kind of behavior that they want to see from their colleagues. It has ripple effects. Courage is contagious, kindness is contagious, empathy is contagious. So we can create that change and lasting change as individuals, but of course, health and safety committees can achieve so much and be such important players in creating that lasting change. Thanks for the questions. It's nice to feel like I'm communicating with people instead of just talking to myself on a screen.
There's another comment on the chat from Joanne. Joanne.
Yeah, I agree, Joanne. I think it is, you know, I think we're taking an approach of this around sort of community health and social accountability and things like that. But that doesn't mean that policy and things of that nature don't play a really important and active role. So I think that there's these things, like, you know, similar to what we talked about before, the magic happens when these things are married, right? And we see both sides of that working well. I think we want to encourage accountability and respect in any ways that we can. And I think that what we try to do with this workshop in particular is get at the root of that stuff, right? And the respect, because I think it's one thing to be at a workplace where people aren't sexually harassing each other because they're afraid, where people aren't sexually harassing each other because they think they're going to get called out, and then finally, what I think we're striving for with this is folks understanding the underlying reasons why that's not valuable and why that causes harm, and seeing each other as autonomous, valuable folks that we don't want to make feel unsafe or uncomfortable at work, right? And understanding how to encourage that as much as we can. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the comments, Joanne. Those are spot on.
Do you have more questions for Richard? We just wait for another a minute or two. If not, then we could wrap up the session earlier. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Richard, for giving us this informative session. This project has been so great, to deliver that important messages to anyone at the workplaces. So if any one of you from your organization have any interest to book the training or join the upcoming training for Richard, so please, visit the website or send an email to Richard and Lauren, then they're able to deliver some information and session for you.
Thanks, everybody. I can hang around for a couple more minutes in case anybody has other questions.
So it looks like no more question on the chat. So thank you all of you joining the presentation this morning with us. Thank you, Richard, again. So this session has been recorded, then we will share to you later on. And do you think some slide will be able to share, Richard? Some of the slides, some part of the slide. Great, awesome. Okay, great. Hope everyone have a great day and see you next month though. Bye. Take care.
Bye.